Ladies and gentlemen, we are live! It's time for a very exciting, very thrilling, and sure to be an insightful webinar on how the voice of the customer can drive a successful customer experience stack. It's presented by my team here at CCW Digital, as well as AskNicely and ChurnZero. Now, voice of the customer is one of those topics that underscores the distinction between idea and action. No one would dare say that the voice of the customer doesn't matter. In fact, we at CCW Digital have data confirming that 100% of organizations acknowledge the importance of the voice of the customer. But not everyone really knows how to put that voice of the customer and that intelligence into play. Not everyone knows how to let the voice of the customer, quite frankly, work for the customer. Well, that's what we're going to be fixing today. We're going to walk through exactly how the voice of the customer can empower an organization, how it can make you more customer-centric, more agent-centric, and ultimately, whether you're on the contact center side, the marketing side, the customer experience design side, whatever your day-to-day role, make sure that the voice of the customer is playing an instrumental part in your success, an instrumental part in your vision. But we're not going to stop there, and you shouldn't allow us to stop there. Because when you have a bold title like Supercharging your contact center stack, you need to deliver. And so we're going to be looking at 7 key optimization points and how you can supercharge each of those to truly elevate that customer experience. As a reminder, you can ask questions using the console on your screen. Again, let your voice be heard. Maybe not your literal voice, but certainly let your questions be heard through typing in those, any insights you want to gain, any specific details you want refreshed, anything you want to know to really make sure that you're not just listening to how we feel about supercharging the tech stack, but you're figuring out how to do it within your organization. Without further ado, I think it's time to meet our panelists. So if you're a regular on these CCW Digital webinars, you surely know my voice. Hopefully it's not annoying you at this point, but I'm Brian Cantor. I'm the principal analyst and director here at CCW Digital. I oversee all of our content and research endeavors and really make sure that we connect you, the listener, you, the community member, to the wealth of insights that exist among our thought leaders in the space. I also want to take the time to introduce my 2 co-panelists today. First of all, we have Mitchell from AskNicely. Mitchell, how's everything going? What kind of does AskNicely do, and sort of what do you see your connection to this topic being?
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot, Brian. Again, my name is Mitchell Hansen, Vice President of Marketing at AskNicely. AskNicely software as a service that helps businesses drive growth by collecting and acting upon customer feedback in real time, built upon the NPS framework. What my connection to this topic is really we see, first of all, I'm a huge technology fan as far as marketing technology, and I see tons of parallels with the customer success stack as the marketing stack, as facilitating the process, driving everything towards more engagement and more growth. And it's really interesting to pick apart this topic and see how we can make that happen.
Perfect. And, we're really thrilled to see how you walk us through, I think, how your organization has understood and mapped out and fleshed out and really worked to get a firm grip on the impact of the voice of the customer. Another person here, our other panelist who has really achieved a lot of success within his own organization when it comes to this topic is Yuman from ChurnZero. And Yuman, tell us about what ChurnZero does, what your take is on the role that the voice of the customer should play as we really strive to compete in today's era of customer centricity.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks, everyone. So I'm Yuman Sang. I'm the founder and CEO of ChurnZero. So we create a customer success platform, and we work generally with B2B subscription companies. And so our platform actually integrates all this great data about your customer, what they say, what they think, what they do. And when you have all that great data, we can help you understand, are they healthy or not? And what are the key next steps for you to do to keep them healthy, happy, and so you retain more of them and churn fewer of them. I think this is an important topic because historically, most of the content that we collect in these technology stacks are things that we've done, calls that we've made, and we've been lacking on what the customer really thinks, what they're doing, and how they impact your customer happiness.
Perfect. Well, I certainly, as we kind of walk through this topic, I think we're really going to jump to those 7 areas where we can truly supercharge the CX stack. And I know that we have a lot of specific examples and insights planned. But before we get there, I want to give Mitchell the chance to sort of walk us through kind of the journey of understanding the connection that the voice of the customer has and kind of translating it from an interesting abstract concept into something that can really drive success in the contact center. So Mitchell, I'll let you walk through some of your material first before we jump into those 7 steps.
Yeah, sure. Thanks again, Brian. Looking at researching this topic a little bit, it's kind of a couple different things kind of coming together. So, we're all really familiar with the customer journey and, the process that your customer goes through post-sale through the stack. But, and these systems are talking to each other, but I was thinking, we were really kind of missing sort of a dimension of segmentation, if you will. So we understand who these people are and what they're doing, but getting a little bit more into that third dimension of segmentation, the sentiment, a little bit of psychographic, it really opens up a lot of opportunity to make things better all along the way when you're facilitating this process. So I saw this really great quote from Lizzie Fu-Kun from Gartner that I thought really was almost set us up for the thesis statement of this entire presentation, which really is this. It's the value of the data is in your action. Your data is an asset, and people are, more and more people are getting a lot of it, more than ever before, but there's sort of a caveat with that. So if you don't have a system for, one, translating that feedback into better business decisions, then you're really not actually making good on the value of that data in an asset, as an asset, sorry. So there's a couple pitfalls that can pop up. You are risking not having internal alignment between, your customer acquisition, your customer success, your support teams, and the whole business. And then the bigger thing, I think, is that you don't have alignment, you don't have an action to go with that data, then what you're putting at risk is not being able to execute quicker than the competition, which when I read that, I think there goes my competitive advantage. So that's what a lot of this is meant to do, is to help us create and keep that competitive advantage. So
let me add a little to that, Mitchell. I mean, I think what Mitchell is saying here is probably, it's my career lesson learned as well. So this is my 5th startup. 3 of the 5 have been in analytics and data. I've been doing it for 25 years. And if there's one lesson I have learned, is that data is important. But if you stop at data, it's a nice to have. It's not it's not valuable enough to become core to your job, core to the corporation. I've been in businesses where we sell reporting tools, which is really all about data. And if you stop there, it's not enough. Take that into how you think about the customer every day. That if all you're doing is collecting data, if that's the end point, you have not gone far enough, right? What does that data trigger? What action do you take from there? How do you make that end loop? And I think if you think about it this way, if you take that from today, that's the most valuable lesson.
One thing I thought that was kind of interesting to illustrate this, I was thinking, what is the most relatable example of the effective voice of the customer that people might relate to? So there's this company called McDonald's that most of you have probably heard of. And, all I can remember forever, ever since I was a kid, was, hey, Mom, why doesn't McDonald's offer breakfast past 10:30 a.m.? And it's just, that was a thing for 30 some odd years. But I think, why we didn't see that happen is, you have to feel some loss, like I was saying, of that competitive advantage. And I think McDonald's saw that, in fairly recently. So what happens? They start listening for the voice of their customer to tell them, implicitly and explicitly, what do they want? Okay, well, they want all-day breakfast. What happens? Okay, McDonald's rolls out all-day breakfast, and then what immediately happens after that is a tangible business result there. So, that's probably the most relatable, example I can think of. But then also the other thing you want to think of as well is that you want to rally. This is not just for someone like me who's all about growth, or someone like my counterpart in customer success that's about customer experience and support. But there's all these different business functions that want all these kind of related but also unique results. And so when we set this entire process up and attach customer feedback data to it, you're going to get these insights and a matching action that I feel like can unlock that result for you. So I guess with that, when we unlock those business results, okay, McDonald's had a bump in sales, but there's lots of different things for lots of different functions. So 86% of customers are willing to pay more for a better customer experience. A lot. If you're into upselling and cross-selling, then your success rates can go up 15 to 20%. Back to growth, 10x greater year-over-year increase in company revenue. On the customer retention side, 55% greater retention rates. On the bottom line, then 23% decrease in customer service costs. And then across the whole company, almost 3x increase in employee engagement. So there's a lot of stuff that's important to lots of these different functions. So that's the end result we have in mind when we're getting into this. So we've mentioned the CS stack quite a bit, but I guess now we can pop into what does that look like? So starting at the top, we have our customer relationship management system. Something like Salesforce, marketing automation, the Marketos, Pardots out there. And then customer journey, that's our friends ChurnZero, our favorites, and community. So that's things like, like Lithium, Jive, Tibco, Salesforce Community Cloud, things like that. Then on the education side of things, I typically think of like a learning management system, like Captivate or Docebo. On the advocacy part, software like Intuitive, Salsa, or even like a loyalty platform like Loyalty 360. And then finally on the support side of things, your Zendesk, Freshdesk, those sorts of things. So, it kind of walks through like the entire process of what happens after you make that sale, after they're a customer. Starts in the CRM, and then you have marketing automation, which is keeping them engaged, customer journeys to make sure they're healthy, make sure they're onboarded, community so they can interact with each other, customer education so they can further their knowledge and become more sticky. And then once all those things happen, then you open yourselves up to advocacy, assuming they're a happy customer. And then the entire time you're supporting them and keeping them happy and helping them put out fires. So all these things add up to your end-to-end process facilitation, but integration is the key. There's really it's way too often you're setting up this whole system and process end-to-end, and you're like, okay, well we've got all our pieces in there, but let's just integrate it on phase 2. And for my research and a little bit of experience, that almost never happens. So we want to show you why it's important to integrate these things up front and to use customer feedback to feed it all along the way. So first, let's start off with CRM. Brian, you want to give us the overview?
Definitely, and absolutely very important to start here, because I think when you're talking about connecting with customers, which everyone really identifies as sort of that ultimate goal, that ideal in that era of customer centricity, CRM is really the heart of that. Now, I think it's really important when you start with this topic to really think about what CRM stands for. I know that sounds like a ridiculous thing to say before an audience of customer experience and contact center professionals. You all know CRM stands for customer relationship management. However, the reason why I preface the conversation that way is that in practice, a lot of organizations reduce CRM to customer interaction recording. It involves agents sort of chronicling their interactions and logging those calls, and really the goal is just to build a record of every conversation they had, kind of build a database of all your customers. And I don't want to say that's not important. I think from a quality standpoint, from a customer management standpoint, you absolutely do need that kind of database. But what's important to remember is that in that existing state, if you don't sort of color that data, it's pretty meaningless. If your goal is trying to understand customers so that you can simultaneously personalize interactions on the microscopic level and also elevate the overall experience on the macroscopic level, you don't really need a record of all interactions. What you really need are stories. You need the ability to have actionable insights from all channels and touch points delivered to agents and systems on demand, where they need them, when they need them. That's what CRM is really all about. It needs to be about introducing us to the voice of the customer, not just kind of a record of who our customers are. And so, Mitchell, I'll start with you, but my question for both of our panelists today is, what is a more customer-centric and actually agent-centric as well version of CRM entail? How do you make sure that your CRM really is about customer relationship management?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. What that makes me think of is the idea of the 360 view of the customer. So there's a couple different aspects of that with CRM for me, myself, I think of that as kind of the one source of the truth, and if it's one source of the truth for reporting and metrics, but it also should be for that customer story as well. And so I think a CRM is something where you can have that 360 view of the customer from different perspectives in your organization, but also kind of set up that outside in sort of customer focused journeys that are going to happen later. Talking about the story, that makes me think of really is like the idea of you're collecting a lot of hard data, a lot of facts. But I think to really make it into a story, you have to also collect that soft data, that contextual stuff that adds the why to the what, you know what I mean? And I think that's really how you set up to be a story. Also, when I'm talking about CRM, this isn't mentioned as part of the stack, but the idea of the customer data platform is becoming a bigger idea now, and so kind of that unified, consistent, accessible, bringing different systems together. I think CRM more so than any system kind of represents that here.
And I would add one thing on stories, right? So just as a something that you can take home. Look, the CRM is going to have a lot of data in it, and and it's fine that it does, because somewhere you just have to have all the details. But it's very helpful because different people from your organization will log into the CRM. You kind of want a quick glance to know where that client is in the journey, right? Are they onboarded? Are they healthy? Is the renewal coming up? Are they getting value out of your service? And so, if you can take all that data, elevate it, and actually at a glance really understand where that customer is, not only will humans looking at it will see benefit, but then you can also trigger all kinds of automated plays or all kinds of actions that can come off that.
Makes perfect sense. And I think ultimately in my perspective, what it comes down to is looking at CRM not just as a database, but as sort of an informant tool. And I think really thinking about what you're pushing out is really where the value of a CRM system comes from. I mean, it's what turns what creates a good CRM tool, as opposed to just being kind of one of those old school spreadsheets. You can keep a record everywhere. You can write down notes about your calls, but making sure that the data, the stories, the information is on demand, that's where the value comes from. And that's what you need to be considering first and foremost when you're buying a CRM solution, but also when you're kind of optimizing what you have, you need to be evaluating it based on that standpoint of, is it allowing for actionable insights? Is it driving agent behavior? Is it giving your organization what it needs when it needs it to solve the problem? That's really where the CRM tool comes from. And I think thinking about how you can capture the voice of the customer really plays a huge role in that, because at that point, you're really bringing home the idea that this is about understanding the customer. It's about thinking about their sentiment, their requests, their demands, who they specifically are, and tying that to their behaviors, tying that to the particular choices they make in a given interaction. And so that's, where I think, really when you start to make voice of the customer a priority with CRM, you couple that with this idea that CRM is about that outbound messaging, what it gives your agents, what it gives your systems. When you combine all that together, that's where you're going to start to see what we would call a supercharged CRM situation. And that's kind of, I think, the ultimate takeaway here. So moving on to phase two, and this is the idea, frankly, this oftentimes does get associated with CRM, but I think as we kind of really understand the different ways we connect with customers, I think we're really starting to see that marketing automation needs to be viewed separately. It needs to be viewed as a separate function because there's a lot of opportunities that can really drive success for the business. And when it comes to the voice of the customer, there's also a lot of opportunities to involve that concept and that intelligence in the way you automate marketing. So let me start at the top about the idea of automation. Now, when you think about automation in a contact center sense, in a customer experience sense, really in any business sense, there's two mindsets you tend to be thinking of. One is, probably what I would call maybe the pragmatic mindset. That is, our agents, our employees, our systems, they have a lot of stuff to do. And so if you can take some of that boring, redundant, or costly work off their plates, if you can kind of use technology to automate that, that's going to certainly, I think, be exciting. That's going to create efficiency. That's going to make people kind of confident in, the value of this technology. That excites a lot of people who kind of look at everything from a, is the work boring and is the work expensive kind of mindset. The other mindset, however, is more about effectiveness. And essentially it looks at, are there tasks that automation or technology can do better than humans can do? Are there ways that it can, in many cases, process data or interact with customers or fulfill certain roles that manual work just wouldn't be up to par with? Manual work would not be as good. And so essentially when you have these two mindsets, you have the good enough alternative or you have the desirable substitute. And I think when you want to talk about marketing automation, especially in this era of connecting with customers, especially in this era where, you want to think about, every marketing message really matters because there's so much competition out there. Thanks to the web, the barriers to entry for most industries are so low right now that if you're not getting the right messaging out there, you're going to have a problem. So when you think about automation in a marketing context, you really want to be thinking about that kind of desirable substitute approach. And so when you basically want to look at marketing activity, you never want to dismiss what you're doing, everything from like an aggressive, high-profile campaign to simple email announcements. You never want that to be viewed as unimportant. You never want that to be viewed as we might as well automate it because no one really wants to do it and we don't really need to have a person on this job anyway. You want to make sure that all of your material is viewed as important because you need to make sure that it resonates with customers. You need to make sure that you're speaking the right information to the right people in the right channel at the right time. And so marketing automation, the real value comes from when it can help us more successfully achieve that sort of right messaging objective than a kind of a manual or one-off kind of campaign would. And so my question, I'll start with you, Mitchell, is, what role does voice of the customer data play in kind of driving that desirable, effective version of marketing automation?
Absolutely, Brian. The purpose, I think, of marketing automation in this context is keeping that customer engaged post-acquisition. So is engagement the key word? But like you kind of also touched on that there's a lot of things competing for that attention. So going back to, am I going to use the marketing automation simply to take away all my boring tasks and then go about my day, or am I going to kind of use it maybe a little bit more strategically and have it do something that a human can't do as well to successfully engage that customer amongst all the competing attention? And so two things really pop into mind. The first thing is the idea of personalization at scale. and simply being predictive. So if we're competing against other things for customers' attention, and we're trying to use marketing automation to get that attention and keep it, then we're going to have a better job winning that battle if we are personalized as much as possible. However, that's not something that's really scales for a human, but that's something that scales greatly for a marketing automation system with the right data. So getting the voice of the customer data in there, getting that third dimension of segmentation and understanding more of the contextual side of the story rather than the hard facts, I think that sets you up to have a lot better campaigns across the board, especially for someone who's your customer who you have a chance to know a little bit extra about.
Yeah, and I think that's really key because I think that, again, we're not in an era of marketing based on products anymore, in most cases. I mean, obviously there's some cases where it really is all about the product, but in industries with a lot of competition, it's not about the product. It's about, I think, being the right brand, being the kind of brand that an organization wants to connect with. And I think in those cases, that's where voice of the data information can come into place so well, because you can start to tie behaviors to mindsets. And when you can do that, you know the kind of language you need to speak to drive the kind of behaviors you want. You know what informs purchasing. You know what informs a customer to leave for a competitor, and you can kind of build your marketing around that. You can also, of course, the whole premise of automation is that it should be easier and it should allow you to be more strategic than you are, trying to do everything kind of manually. And so by understanding certain channel preferences, understanding certain kind of communication style preferences, it also allows you to put the right message into place where it needs to be. This not only comes into play within like a traditional marketing automation concept, but I see that factoring a lot in terms of proactive engagement as well. When I talk about proactive engagement a lot, on the one hand, it seems like this amazing thing that's going to make the experience easier and more personal for customers. But on the other hand, it often can be reduced to kind of come across as spammy. It kind of annoys customers, so they don't want to hear from your business at the right time. And I think really starting to think about who the customer is and what they really want will help you flesh out when should the message come into play. And your automation tool is obviously going to be much more intelligent in many cases than a manual person would at figuring out how to play to that optimization.
Yeah, let me add one thing to this. So I think marketing automation actually is a bit of it could be a misnomer. I mean, you got to put the word customer marketing automation in front of it, and the stakes are much higher for this group than it is for marketing, right? Marketing, people have shown interest. They may want to be a customer of yours. They all want to do the same thing. Once they're a customer of yours, they will all take on very different behaviors. Some people would love you. Some people will not like you. Some people will engage with your product or service. Some people will not. And if you don't actually treat them the right way and you automate without the voice of the customer, you will send the wrong message at the wrong time. And not only is that embarrassing, but the customer expects so much more once they're a customer. If you don't deliver it, you're in real trouble. So I think this is an extremely important part of the discussion today. And if you're going to do it, you absolutely need to do it right. And the way you do it right is to understand your customer here.
And Mitchell, did you have something to add there before we move on?
Yeah, I was just kind of thinking of going back to, we mentioned the idea of, kind of a playbook earlier, and, that's kind of what you're setting yourself up for is, really is no play that is always completed within one system, a lot of times. So having all your systems talking to each other to be able to execute a play that might cross over a few, a process that might cross over a few different pieces of the technology, I think it's just important to kind of keep that in mind. That's it.
Definitely makes sense there. And I think really starting to have a vision for all these functions is going to be important. And speaking of kind of a vision and thinking about kind of mapping a playbook out, our next topic area, our next focus is going to be on the idea of the customer journey. Now, if voice of the customer is one of the most familiar concepts to everyone listening, then I'd imagine customer journey has to be a close second. I think most of our listeners, pretty much anyone who touches on the customer experience, knows about the role of the customer journey. They know that everyone's pushing for you to look at the experience in terms of a journey and not just disparate transactions. But the big thing is, and even if they kind of know the value as well, so they do know that I think journey mapping will help us understand what's happening at key moments of truth. It'll help us learn about some key pain points. It'll help us kind of understand what the customer's thinking, what the customer's trying to achieve. I think most people understand that sort of theoretical value of the customer journey. But that sort of is where the talk stops. I think a lot of people take for granted, if I were to tell you that you could understand what's going on wrong with your customer experience, what needs to happen to make customers happier, that's all a lot of people need to hear to be convinced. That's all they need to know, that the customer journey is important. But that doesn't necessarily lead to a better experience. It doesn't necessarily lead to the real purpose of journey mapping, which is optimization. And so, Mitchell, I want to kind of pose to you as we kick off this portion of the conversation a few questions to think about. So first of all, a lot of the insight I talked about from a customer journey, whether it's understanding sentiment or intent or pain points, it takes a certain degree of analysis and strategy to actually identify that information. It's not just, oh, I care about journeys now, when suddenly it kind of rears its head for our organization. We need to know how to look, and we need to know how to gather that data. And then more importantly, once we have that data, what do we do with it? Where does the real value come from? How do we drive the change so that we're not just mapping what's going on, but we're actually building a better journey?
Yeah, thinking about customer journeys, I mean, you're kind of taking somebody from a point, and you're trying to get them through a bunch of milestones and have a really good even more solid, even more successful relationship with them. Once you've gone through all these checkpoints. And so, what my colleagues in customer success have always taught me is that you have to have this outside-in view of it. I mean, it has to be done. You have to build these journeys from their perspective, and if that that might mean building one for each customer profile, or building that are going to be greatly different lengths or with different checkpoints on them, but you have to have their view of it. It's not just how do we want to shove people through this journey as fast as possible in order to get them to go on to the next one, or something like that. You have to what does success look like at each step? How do we know what their perception of that is? And so I think that's where the voice of the customer comes in, is because if we understand our customers as a group enough to know what journeys we should have and who should be on what and what those look like, we can understand if those are the right ones with feedback, and we can understand what is their real moment of truth, current and future, and we can kind of benchmark and judge the effort based on their feedback on that. And then to cap that off, also in researching this, I was kind of surprised, but also not surprised, that the number one reason customer journeys fail is lack of action. So maybe that's a testament to having the wrong data for the wrong project. So if you can again get all your systems talking to each other, then the idea of a workflow is enabled, and so then I think that helps you get a lot closer to the action, and then hopefully more successful journey.
And the one piece of advice I would give for you guys, for folks who haven't journey mapped yet or in the middle of doing it, is I would say don't start with very granular steps in your journey. Start with bigger steps. Hey, they need to do this big thing like implementation or get a training, because you can always get more granular. As your first customers move the journey, you really try to understand if it's working or not. The other thing I would also really recommend is that journeys always change. You'll learn more. Your product or service will change. Your customers will change. So mapping a journey isn't a one-time thing that you do once every few years and then you're stuck with it. It really does have to be fairly living and breathing. So you're always offering the best path for your customers.
speaking of the best path for customers, so one of the kind of interesting topics when it comes to the customer experience space is the idea of customer education. Now, if I were to go out to you and say, if I were to say in front of anyone, I know better than my customers, I'd be laughed out of the room. We mock that notion, especially within a context of a webinar on the voice of the customer. The idea of someone saying they know better than their customers is probably not going to get a lot of support. But there's a point at which it should, right? Because customers have a limited window into the overall experience. And that limited window defines their preferences. So essentially, they're making their preferences, they're formulating their opinion based on a very limited insight into a very small amount of data. We obviously know the entirety of our experiences. We know the best place to get a certain problem solved. And so realistically, as business leaders, we do know more about customers when it comes to the particular journey. But you can't say that. And you also can't ignore that even if their preferences are sort of formulated based on incomplete information, customers are still married to those preferences. That's what they want, and they expect us as supposedly customer-centric businesses to deliver that for them. And so I think that creates an interesting conversation around the idea of customer education. Because we, on the one hand, the entities driving the strategies, they know what's the right way to navigate the experience. And so they should be able to educate customers on that knowledge. They should condition customers to pursue certain interactions and certain resolutions in a certain way. But they can't do so in a way that comes across as impositional, as in, we're the business, so you're going to do what we want and you're going to have to deal with it. That's the kind of jargon, the kind of perspective that sends customers running to competitors. So, Mitchell, when you think about customer education, how do you kind of walk that balance? How do you, on the one hand, see where there's opportunities to truly educate customers in a way that will help them and help the business without coming across as if you're sort of imposing on them? And, are there situations where maybe it's better to just let them be wrong than try to convince them you're right?
Yeah, it's really good food for thought here, Ryan. So it is a little bit of a line you have to walk, but I feel like if you're truly listening, then and I could be completely wrong here, so I'd be interested to see what Yuman says as well. But I feel like if you're really listening, then you're kind of reading between the lines, especially as a brand new customer, and you're kind of trying to listen to what their goals and outcomes are that they want to create. And so they might ask you for something very specific, but you might know that based on our knowledge and people just like you that have come down this journey that want that outcome and how they get that, we might need to actually present and sort of have them sort of see the light on maybe something that different than what they're asking for in order to get to the goal or outcome that they are asking for. So I think that comes with a lot of repetition in recognizing that goal, recognizing who that person is that wants to achieve that or achieve that outcome, and sort of selling that little bit different way of going about that to them. But I think that's why feedback is important. You can't just it's not one size fits all, but I think you can help someone realize what they really want to get by not just giving them what they're asking for. That's kind of how I look at it.
Yeah, I think that's right, Mitchell. I mean, certainly every customer is different. I mean, every slide we can say that. But for customer education, probably the thing I've seen, sort of, especially over the last few years, is that your customers want more and more and more from you, and they see you as many of them will see you as the expert. Some people will say, hey, look, when I bought your thing, I expect A, B, and C, and I expect to be better, stronger, know more. So, AskNicely customers expect AskNicely to be experts at NPS and what to do, and your customers want to learn. Our customers expect us to be experts in customer success, and they expect us to help them with best practices. Not all of them, of course, right? A lot of them, just want your tool and they want to, not be bothered. But a lot of them do want help, and customer education is a big part of it. And if you do it right, actually, they become partners. They stay with you for a long time because you've helped them improve their business. So this is certainly an important part.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And I think that kind of goes back even to when we touched on intent in the customer journey section. I think that people, they're not passionate about superficial preferences. They're passionate about, I think, the overall experience and the outcome. And they're not going to hate you for driving them to a better outcome. I think what you need to keep in mind is if you have that well-intentioned perspective, it's going to work out. Don't view customer education, though, as an excuse to kind of steer customers in a direction that's just cost-effective for the business that doesn't necessarily lead to a better outcome. So I think if you go into it with a customer-centric mindset, customer education makes a lot of sense. I think you just can't use it as carte blanche to impose your own kind of business-centric, short-sighted, cost-conscious mindset on people. And I think with what Mitchell and Yuman said really ties into that idea that if you're making value, creating value for them, then it's worthwhile education.
Yeah, Brian, one last thing on that. I think if going back to the outside-in approach, I think if you just maintain that all the way, then you won't. That'll be your guardrail to make sure you do just what you said.
Now, one of the areas that a lot of organizations, especially when you think about this era of trying to build loyal customers and trying to kind of build a footprint in social media, one of those areas really is the idea of customer communities. And I think for most industries, we want to build some form of community. It may not be that super active, message board that can happen in a technology organization, but there's a degree to which you can cultivate community. But I think when you do that, you need to do it the right way. You can look at it from, let's just get the biggest community possible, and you sort of incentivize kind of membership, and I think you're going to gain some short-term fans. You can kind of gain an impressive community. You can get a lot of followers on your social media account or whatever you're trying to do. But what happens, though, is that once your incentive is no longer interesting, or once your competitor offers something better, you no longer really have a community. You have people that signed up once or joined once or expressed interest once who are just really chasing the highest bidder. And so what you want to look at are legitimate, organic communities. Give them a reason to continue being loyal. Give them value that makes them feel good about being kind of connected to your business. And so obviously, you can only do that if you understand who your customers are, what their desires are, what they're really looking for. Mitchell, how do you kind of gain that information? How do you not only understand, voice of the customer, we can find out what they think about the experience, but how do you go that extra mile and decide what's going to make someone most likely to want to be kind of in a long-term community or relationship with our brand?
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges with community, like you were talking about, is just simply getting people to join. So I feel like if you're tapped into the voice of the customer, then it's almost like a cheat code, or you're kind of like stacking the deck for who's ready to be in community. Who's at that point in their journey, and that could be community could come into different plays. I think at different points in that journey, depending on a bunch of things. But who's ready for this? In building communities before. You don't want to take the whole, spray and pray, just invite everybody right off the bat. And, you kind of get brand new customers that are like, what's this? I'm not ready for this. I don't know what can add value. So if you're using NPS as an example, if you're doing NPS, in a real-time manner, then, maybe something like you could find out or put together something like, every time we get a promoter, where we might throw an invite to the community out there. So we're only asking people at the right time on their journey, that moment of truth, like they've kind of reached that threshold for engagement or happiness in their sentiment, that you can once you dial that in a little bit, I feel like the community could build itself through automation. And so you are actually doing a lot better job building community faster with only the right people because you've automated the process. And also the second part of that of community with voice of the customer, I think, is I think of community in a lot of ways. It's almost like a product. You've got a roadmap. You can start with an MVP. You can keep building it up over time. And so not only are you getting the right people in there and building it as fast as possible, but if you kind of treat it like like product feedback almost, then you can tap into the voice of the customer to know what we should do next on, that kind of quote-unquote community roadmap. So a couple big challenges with field management community that I've seen a lot, and I think voice of the customer is a really good solution to get around those.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to this is that I think this is the most underestimated projects on the board. People think they could do it. People sort of check it off. They think it's a check mark. They think they can get it done quickly. And the failure rate here is very, very high. So definitely have a plan. It's going to take a lot of investment of time, technology, and money in order to create a successful community. So, don't underestimate this part of it.
When you think about the driver, and I agree with you, Yuman, about the importance of the community, but when you think about kind of what you're looking to achieve within a community, I think obviously one is really cultivating that loyalty, that repeat business, that repeat support, that group of supporters who are willing to kind of help educate customers. But the other component is building advocates, making sure that you don't just have people who are loyal to your brand, but they actually want to promote your brand and publicly support it. They want to help drive future business and share a positive word of mouth. And just as I mentioned, and just as we all kind of agreed that you really need to create value in the community that's going to make people want to organically become a member, the same principle really applies to advocacy. You can't buy support. You really want to naturally trigger it. And so, obviously Net Promoter Score, this is where it comes into play. And obviously that plays a huge role in helping us determine who's most likely to promote or whether on the aggregate level our customers are likely to sort of advocate for our brand. But what it doesn't automatically tell you is what the triggers are that are going to kind of compel them from likely to recommend to actually making those recommendations. And so what I want to ask you, Mitchell, because I know that your organization kind of focuses a lot on the Net Promoter component, how do you kind of look beyond kind of just the score and really start to, through voice of the customer data, start to understand how you can sort of drive those advocacy triggers and how you can sort of measure and chronicle and expand advocacy once it starts?
Yeah, absolutely, Brian. This is kind of where, everything kind of starts coming together here, because you also have to remember that advocacy is also a key part in any customer journey. For a marketer like me, it's kind of the most exciting part. So you should, we'll talk, speaking of triggers, like you mentioned, you want to make sure you're mapping whatever triggers you're setting up to cue off advocacy things as part of your journey. So it has to be in the right place. And, there's like negative triggers for certain things, but there's also positive triggers. And positive triggers are kind of built around, motivation, habit. So there's a lot of opportunity for automation in here. And, our view is that, you're kind of creating this idea of a flywheel, because your customers are creating opportunities for you to, I like to, I don't know who else uses this, but I like an active advocacy. So that could be a review, a referral, raising your hand for a case study. And then, if somebody does a case study, then you use that case study to go get more customers that can be turned into advocates. So it's almost like if you invest and set this up right, you can almost be like a compound growth engine, hence the flywheel. So, what you're doing is kind of like, setting it all up in this journey with like, okay, what's the motivation? And what are we using as the trigger? And will the action occur? So that's the idea of the growth flywheel is big here. So yes, I also like when you're automating that you're more ensuring that nobody's going to be left behind. So it's this kind of idea of scaling, right? You can't always have a CSM or somebody reach out every time or be totally in tune to this, that, or the other thing that's a trigger. So you have to automate this thing to really make it scale.
Yeah, I think this is the key between successful companies and struggling companies, right? Do you have in the end, of course, customers are going to be happy, and if you can take advantage of happy customers, work with them, make it rewarding for them, either karmically rewarding or financially rewarding. This is the difference between companies that can flourish and grow and those who are stagnant.
our final kind of part of the customer success stack, the client success stack that we're talking about concerns support. Now, support is one of those interesting areas when you have this kind of conversation, because on the one hand, it's what, generally a lot of our audience really focuses on day in and day out. But there's kind of an interesting component in that while we want to focus on these customer-centric topics and these connections, we also know that support, more than almost any other kind of element of customer engagement, has a binary transactional component. There's a clear problem, and the business is expected to fix it. And so it becomes easy to kind of mistake support for, well, the truest way to know whether it was a successful support interaction is, did you solve the customer's problem? But what happens is that if you just focus on that, you ignore the fact that there's a journey to that solution. Did you communicate the support where, when, and how the customer wanted it? Was that communication enjoyable and personalized? And so even though FCR, first contact resolution, is a valuable metric for kind of understanding whether you provide good support, it doesn't necessarily tell you the answer as to what did that support journey entail. It doesn't give you that outside-in perspective. And so Mitchell, how do you do that? How do you, on the one hand, not forget that the core of support is transactional, but still make sure that you're kind of checking the other box to truly create a great experience, total experience?
Yeah, absolutely. This goes back to something we talked about way back at CRM, even with the what and the why. Because yes, was your problem solved? There's kind of a yes or no there. I think you can be pretty black or white, but you still want context. So you have to look at this in context of everything that else is going on with, where are they at in their journey? Is this a moment of truth? The problem might have been solved or not, but why, what is all the context that goes on around that? So I think, you really don't have that unless you're getting the hard and soft data and then having to talk in between these systems, seeing that in context of the customer journey. And then also I think the other big thing of this, and this is where integration comes into play, is that how is the rest of the business going to know what just happened on the front line? So then you're peeling this not just was the problem solved, and it was solved by, which rep was solved it, which customer, but then you can play that back into, something that's going to put this on a dashboard in front of the rest of the company, make it more of a high-profile potential, topic of conversation so that the rest of the company knows what happened and why. And I think that's going to set you up for a better relationship and better success all across the board.
Yuman, any thoughts before we kind of move into the closing portion and some Q&A?
I don't. Let's move.
Perfect. So, Mitchell, I'm going to let you wrap up, and then we do have a few questions in a few minutes, so we'll jump into those.
Sure. Yeah, so, going back to the slide earlier where, you got your whole stack stacked up, and, customer feedback, we think of, the word supercharging was sort of intentional. You've got your stack, which is like your engine that makes your customer success process move. And, we think of customer feedback as something that it's just like this, something you're just, attaching on to that existing stack. This is going to make everything better. So, customer feedback comes in many different flavors, but for NPS, you have a nice way of looking at them, but with promoters, passives, and detractors. For many of you probably know, promoters are people that love you, easily recommend you. Passives are, they're content, but they're potentially at risk to switch, or just not 100% solid. So, and then there's of course detractors that people are not happy and could damage your reputation, share the negative experience, easily ditch you. So, there's different goals you can also have with these different segments if you include customer feedback in your segmentation strategy. You could have somebody who's exactly the same in a lot of different ways as far as like what they, who they are and what they do and what they care about, but your feedback is that extra dimension of segmentation that's going to help you potentially make a completely different decision or have a different action than you would for somebody that was the opposite. And then a couple other takeaways here, just focusing on the entire customer experience with the product or service, not just that last touch point or that last transaction, but how do they feel about the entire relationship? And then going back to that playbook, your playbook is only as good as taking that right action in real time. And there's a lot of different actions that can be taken at a lot of different times and in a lot of different systems by a lot of different people. But if you are truly using customer feedback to supercharge your systems and processes, then you're going to be awesome at that.
And the one thing I would add about NPS, which is amazing, is voice of customer sometimes sounds daunting, sounds big, sounds expensive. NPS is a great way to start. It's fast. Your customers, the response rate is high. The ask of your customer is very low. It's a very quick question. It's just a great way to start. I encourage everyone to do that if they haven't done so already. So don't let voice of customer be this big thing that scares you away. Start with the NPS, and then you can step into other feedback mechanisms after that.
Yeah, that's well said, Yuman. I know we like to think of NPS is like the quickest time to value for voice of the customer that you could probably do. So I ended this with just like if you're going to take away one slide from this and maybe print it out and throw it on a bulletin board somewhere, something to remember about how to approach this and kind of like a 9 tenets, if you will. Understand where you're starting, no matter what system you're in. Understand what the starting point is. When you make the move to use customer feedback to supercharge your systems, know where you're starting so you can know, hey, we supercharged this. How super is that charge we got? And then back to NPS is the best way to get the most feedback, the highest response rate, what was still getting a qualitative and quantitative bit of data behind that. So you don't want a long survey because you're just not going to get the breadth of data that you need from the breadth of people. But you want to get that feedback at the right moment of truth. Like you have to understand what is an important time, what's going to be meaningful. So when you take all that feedback and you pump it into all your processes and systems, you have a lot of different needs from a lot of different departments that want a lot of different outcomes. And so you have to set up how you're going to capture and use and automate this data to meet those needs. And as you're executing on that, you're looking for patterns, but you can't get caught up in just looking for patterns, and you definitely can't. I think we did a really good job of showing you can't have your customer feedback and VOC data in a silo. You have to integrate that. You have to look for cross-system, cross-object patterns, and then you'll be ready to enable this real-time action and automate it. And so ideally, if you do all these things, then you're getting all those positive results that we talked about at the beginning, all those different numbers that mean that very meaningful to those different departments. And then hopefully at that point, you've got a predictable, repeatable process for, in the way AskNicely thinks of this is a growth engine here. So you've set up your flywheel, and that's just about riding that flywheel and making it go bigger and faster. So that's really the recap there.
Well, I want to thank Mitchell and Yuman for their tremendous insights throughout. And again, I think not hearing it from various perspectives on kind of the cycle when it comes to executing CX strategy really, I think, made for a lot of informative data throughout today's conversation. We do have about a minute or two for questions. We're obviously not going to get to everything, but we'll definitely follow up via email. So even if you want to keep sending them, make sure to do that, and we'll follow up as soon as we can. But I do want to start with one question because we received a few variations of this, and it really concerns, I think, kind of the role of automation and AI and to what extent there should be an emotional component to that, and to what extent it can kind of take over some of the emotional tasks that humans are doing when it comes to kind of connecting with customers. I'll give my take real quickly, and then I'll let our other panelists answer. My gut reaction kind of on this is that I think what you want to still keep in mind is that key question of where is automation, where is AI going to add unique value to the customer experience versus where is a human agent going to create unique value. Don't try to replicate the other just for the sake of workflow. Be organic about where the value is going to come from. And then once you've kind of established that journey and you've established where does it make sense for artificial intelligence, where does it make sense for self-service, where does it make sense for a live agent, then start to enhance those different capabilities. So for instance, if you decide that an interaction that is somewhat transactional still makes sense to pass to a live agent, make sure that you use automation internally to give that live agent what he needs so he can answer the question quickly and as quickly and accurately as possible. Same with on the front end. Suppose you have self-service where you decide someone changing their delivery order makes sense for that to be a self-service task, and it makes sense to use AI to make that happen. That's fine, but that doesn't mean you can't incorporate some human elements into your self-service bot. It doesn't mean you shouldn't be trying to, I think, develop the ability to react to natural conversation. So I think essentially my recommendation here is don't try to chase a particular, outcome with the technology. Start with where does this technology fit into your overall customer experience design, and then how can you enhance the role that it's playing? As of right now, there are still going to be some tasks that are better for self-service technology, and there will be some roles that are better for live agents. Don't necessarily try to fight that. Try to enhance those roles so you can create the most value possible. Yuman or Mitchell, do you have any perspectives here?
I don't have anything to that. I think that was a great answer, Brian.
Yeah, that was a pretty great answer, Brian. Just to try to add something to that, I think you're going to see systems get smarter about recognizing, sentiment in communications like that, and things like natural language processing and some other technologies that are making predictive AI, that sort of family of technology. I think those are just going to get better. You're starting to see some things with bots that can do more and more and more. But there's a limit to when things need to have an emotion, and I think systems might get smarter.
And I think that might have been a bell from the webinar hitting the time frame, but I'm going to try to squeeze in a quick second question if we can, and that concerns the customer communities portion. And I believe this was in response to something I said, but I'm sure any of our speakers can answer this. And it was the idea that if your community is really meant to, in part, educate customers, should you only be trying to build community of net promoters or likely advocates? And to clarify, I think, where I was going when I mentioned the education component is when you think about a lot of great technology brands, when you think about, how Apple will have people supporting you, when you think about Wikipedia, where you have certain contributors who are like ridiculously accurate and aggressive when it comes to making sure the right information's out there. When you think about different sort of travel communities, or you think about Yelp, or you think about any scenario where there's value in expertise. I know Republic Wireless, who we've done some work with, actually uses community-based support to kind of answer simple transactional matters before they get escalated to a live agent. And so you have all these scenarios where there's an opportunity for basically community members to be answering these questions in a way that not only can take some workload off your agent's plate, but also present the information in a way that makes sense to customers and a way that really reflects the true outside-in experience. So what I was advocating for was make sure that you build an organic community of those kinds of people who understand the journey, are passionate about your product, and are willing to sort of support it, because then they can be the best resource when it comes to starting to let people know about new functionalities or new ways to navigate your journey. They can be true advocates for your brand because they feel a connection to it, and they're who you kind of want to have as sort of your first line of defense, so to speak, when concerned customers, when frustrated customers, when uneducated customers interact with your brand and kind of want to get problems solved. So what I think is the idea, you should never try to ignore detractors, but what you should do is cultivate a community of advocates who can help connect with the detractors in an unbiased and valuable way.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think the idea is kickstart your community with your promoters, right? Especially the ones who want to help and who are smart about what you do. And then, open it up, of course, to everyone over time, but you still need someone there helping you out at the beginning. And promoters are the best way to do that.
Yeah, I'll just add that, going back to the idea of the building a community roadmap like a product, I mean, that just makes me say that if I have promoters, passives, and detractors, then, I think of that as like three different, profiles that might be having different use cases for my community. We got a good question in saying, if it's educational, what do I want to really just invite promoters? And I think, yeah, you might have a great point about your promoters might be the ones that are going to help you educate those people that might need that help, but you can still build different features and functionality to address each.
And I think we'll do one more quickly. I hope it doesn't bother our speakers because we've had so many great questions. And one really concerns, I think, when you have a non-conventional transaction, so maybe you have people kind of coming to your brand with a negative mindset and there's a crisis involved. And so, maybe there's never going to be a scenario where they're going to become a true brand advocate, but are there ways to kind of track that at least you're changing their sentiment and you're changing their perspective? So even if they're not some aggressive promoter, you can kind of determine that your journey was effective for that given customer. Before I answer, do any of our other panelists have a take there?
I don't.
Neither do I.
Yeah, so my answer here basically is that I think ultimately there's an old saying in the space that when things go wrong, that's really where brand loyalty is built. Because, obviously, people who, when things are going right, all they know is that things are working. They don't really get to see, I think, the humanity behind the organization and kind of what happens. So I don't think, maybe Net Promoter Score isn't always going to be the right way to track these people because, there's probably a case where they're never going to want to promote your service if it's something. I can think of things along the lines of like debt collectors. No one's necessarily going to want to say, I advocate for this company that's going to bother me to give them money. That may never happen. But what may happen is, you can look at, they were kind of aware of my needs and they were able to, kind of understand, how, what my needs were. They were able to walk me through it. They arranged a payment plan, whatever it may be. And so what I think you want to look for in these situations is ultimately what does a supporter look like in your scenario? In some cases, it will be a promoter. In some cases, it will be someone who likes doing business with you and won't bash you online, won't complain about you. And once you identify, I think, what that ideal supporter is, you can build metrics, whether it's just looking at CSAT surveys, whether it's looking at Net Promoter, whatever it may be, looking at analytics from within the journey, and then you can decide, did we create that kind of degree of support? Did we derive that outcome? Going back to what Mitchell and Yuman said much earlier in the discussion, it's really about, I think, understanding what the real outcome is. And that's once you understand what the goal of the customer is, that's where everything from metrics to experience design to customer education really falls into place. So I think that, and I hope if I did misunderstand your question, feel free to let me know and I'll definitely respond after the fact. But if I understood correctly, the idea is there are scenarios where a 100 Net Promoter Score is completely unthinkable. A positive Net Promoter Score is unthinkable. But if you start to look at, I think, what questions you should be asking and what you should be measuring based on kind of what an ideal supporter looks like, I think you can still understand whether you're making the kind of connection you should. And so that's definitely
the one thing
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing I would add is also think about relative to yourself, right? So, take a score, take an NPS survey, you have a baseline, and it may be negative, it may be positive, it depends on your industry. But as long as you see improvement, right, in it, then you can feel good about sort of, the strides you're making as a company. So it doesn't matter absolutely where your NPS score is. It does matter, however, relatively.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, and that's a great way to end. I think that's really a great way to think about the voice of the customer. This isn't about just getting the data. It's not about getting a score. It's about identifying and then realizing opportunities for improvement. Voice of the customer tells you how to improve the different 7 bucket areas that we talked about, and then you can kind of comes back into play and kind of closes the loop by telling you whether you've improved or regressed kind of in the right or wrong direction. And I think that's really where, if you want to talk about supercharging a strategy, a stack, it's not just empowering the right decisions right now, it's about evaluating how those decisions need to evolve over time. And so I think that advice right there is a perfect way to kind of wrap up today's discussion. Again, I want to thank Mitchell and AskNicely. I want to thank Yuman and ChurnZero for sharing your perspectives here, because as much as I love talking and as much as loud as I can be, I think your insights from those different parts of the chain really brought this together, and I'm really confident answered a lot of key questions for our audience and will allow them to go ahead and really elevate their client success stack. So thanks a lot, guys.
Thanks.
All right, thank you too.
All right, and as a reminder, the recording will be available. You will get an email reminder, but I'm pretty sure it's the same link, and it's just going to be starting tomorrow, about 24 hours from now. It'll just revert to the video version, but I'll double check that and make sure that you get the proper reminder email so you can share with your team and you can go about putting some of these ideas into place. Thanks a lot. On behalf of CCW Digital, AskNicely, ChurnZero, this has been our webinar.